At family dinner, my sister hit me, pushed me out, and said, "Get out of my house." I am her big sister. I gave up everything for her. After the accident that took our parents, I became her mother, her father, her entire world. I buried my own dreams, turned away from the chance of a family of my own, all to ensure she had everything. I even helped her capture the heart of a wealthy man, building her this golden cage of a life. And tonight, she used that very same hand I held through every childhood nightmare to strike me, and she exiled me from the kingdom I helped her build. My name is Alara, but standing there on the icy steps, the ghost of her slap burning on my cheek, the name felt like a lie. For 38 years, Alara had meant provider, protector, the one who endures. It was a name etched with the fatigue of double shifts, the worry of unpaid bills, the scent of cheap noodles cooked for the 10th time in a week. It was a name that had learned to swallow its own hunger so a little girl named Clara could be full. Now that name was just a hollow echo in the freezing air. The pain wasn't just skin deep. It was a seismic shock that traveled down to my bones, rattling the foundations of every memory, every sacrifice. The wind clawed at my thin cardigan, a mocking reminder of my vulnerability. I had walked into that house, her magnificent, cold mansion, and I had left my coat on the rack by the door like I belonged. The irony was a physical ache in my throat. The door was a wall of dark, gleaming wood, slammed shut with a finality that stole the breath from my lungs. Through the warped glass, the dining room was a kaleidoscope of warm, golden light, a scene of domestic bliss I was no longer part of. I could still hear the faint, civilized tinkle of a fork against a plate. Life was continuing in there. My expulsion was just a minor interruption. Get out of my house. The words weren't just sounds, they were acid, eating through the tapestry of our shared history. My house. Not the cramped, shabby apartment that had been a fortress of our shared survival. Not the place where I'd held her after nightmares, where I'd celebrated her straight-A report card with a discounted cake, where I'd sewn her prom dress by hand because we couldn't afford to buy one. That was our home. This cold, perfect museum was hers. And with 3 words, she had rewritten our entire past, erasing my presence from her story. It had all unraveled from a single, fragile thread of concern. A thread I had spun from a love I still, foolishly, believed in. "How was parent-teacher night, sweetie?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended, trying to bridge the ever-widening chasm between us. Mrs. Davison always had such nice things to say about Liam's reading. Clara was across the vast expanse of the mahogany table, a queen on her throne. She was swirling the wine in her glass, the deep ruby liquid catching the light. She didn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed on the swirling vortex, as if the answers to all her discontent lay somewhere in the bottom of that crystal bowl. The silence that followed my question was heavy, thick enough to choke on. Julian, her husband, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting between the two of us. Little Liam, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, stared intently at his peas, pushing them around his plate. Then her eyes lifted, but they didn't find mine. They landed on Julian, and they were full of a cold fire. "Mrs. Davison," she said, her voice a sharp, brittle thing, "thinks we need to be more engaged." She made air quotes with her perfectly manicured fingers, the gesture dripping with contempt. "She says Liam is quiet in class, that he seems withdrawn." My heart clenched for my nephew. He was a sensitive boy, much like I had been, overwhelmed by the noise and expectations of his world. "He's always been a thoughtful boy, Clara," I said gently. "He just takes the world in differently. There's nothing wrong with that." That's when her head snapped toward me. The full force of her glare was like a physical blow. "There is everything wrong with it, Alara," she hissed. "This isn't your world of quiet contemplation and making do. This is the real world. He needs to be strong. He needs to be a leader, not a daydreamer hiding in the corner." The condescension in her voice, the way she dismissed the very values I had raised her with, cut deeper than any insult. "Being thoughtful is a strength, Clara. It's what got you through." "Don't," she interrupted, her voice rising, a sharp crack in the tense air. "Don't you dare start with the back and the old days stories. That's all you have, isn't it? Those pathetic little tailies of struggle. You wear your martyrdom like a badge of honor, and you can't stand that I've moved on, that I've built a life you could never even imagine." The air left my lungs. Martyrdom. Is that what she saw? All those years of love, of sacrifice, reduced to a performance. Clara, that's not true. I'm proud of you. Are you? She screamed, slamming her palm on the table. The glasses rattled. Liam flinched. Are you really? Or are you just lurking here in my house, waiting for it all to fall apart so you can swoop in and be the hero again? So you can feel needed? You're like a ghost, Alara, haunting my happiness, reminding me of everything I'm supposed to be grateful for. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I looked at Julian, pleading for him to intervene, to calm his wife, to defend me. But he just stared at his plate, a portrait of impotent wealth. He was afraid of her. They all were. I stood up, my chair scraping against the polished floor. My hands were trembling. I think I should go. Yes, she spat, rising to her feet as well. You should. The fury in her eyes was unhinged, a wild thing I didn't recognize. But not before you understand. This is my life, my son, my house. You don't get a say anymore. Your job is done, you're obsolete. The word hung in the air, monstrous and final. Obsolete. I turned to leave, my vision blurring, desperate to escape the suffocating cruelty. As I passed her chair, I felt a sharp, violent grip on my arm. I'm not finished, she snarled. She yanked me back, and before I could process it, her hand, the one adorned with the heavy, cold signet ring Julian had given her, swung through the air. The impact was a bright, white explosion of pain. The sound of the slap seemed to echo forever in the high-ceilinged room. Time stopped. I could only stare at her, at the twisted, ugly mask her beautiful face had become. I saw no regret, no shock at her own actions. Only a terrifying, triumphant hatred. Then she shoved me, hard. I stumbled back, my hip connecting painfully with the doorframe. I fumbled for the handle, my fingers numb and clumsy. I pulled the heavy door open and staggered out into the cold. And then the slam, the definitive, deafening sound of my past being locked away from me. The memory dissolved, leaving me shivering on the steps. The burning on my cheek had subsided to a dull throb, but the wound inside was hemorrhaging a pain so acute it was nauseating. Obsolete. A car turned into the long, winding driveway, its headlights cutting through the darkness, momentarily illuminating my humiliation. I stumbled away from the door, my body moving on an instinct of pure survival, desperate to escape the light, the judgment, the scene of my ultimate failure. I had nowhere to go. My purse, with my phone and wallet, was still inside, on the bench in the grand foyer where I'd left it. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and the searing memory of my sister's betrayal. I walked for miles, the cold seeping into my bones. The wealthy, manicured neighborhood gave way to more modest streets, and finally, to the familiar, worn-down edges of the city where we had grown up. It was past midnight when I found myself standing outside Mrs. Petrov's old building. She had been our landlady, a stern but kind-hearted woman who had sometimes looked the other way when the rent was a few days late. I rang the buzzer for the superintendent, praying someone would still be awake. A bleary-eyed man in his 60s opened the door. I must have been a sight, a shivering, coatless woman with a faint red mark on her face and the desperate look of a stray animal. I used the last of my dignity to ask if I could use his phone. I called the only person I could think of. Sarah, a friend from my old waitressing days, a connection from a life I had left behind when Clara's needs became my sole focus. Sarah answered, her voice thick with sleep. Within an hour, she was there, wrapping a thick blanket around my shoulders and ushering me into her warm car. She didn't ask many questions. She just saw the devastation on my face and acted. At her small, cluttered apartment, she gave me a pair of pajamas, a cup of hot tea, and a bed on her sofa. As I finally succumbed to exhaustion, the dam broke. Sobs racked my body, great, heaving waves of grief for the sister I had lost, for the life I had wasted, for the terrifying emptiness of my future. The next morning, fueled by a cold, hard resolve that had been forged in the fire of Clara's hatred, I made a plan. Sarah lent me some money. My first stop was the public library, where I used a computer to access my meager savings. I withdrew everything, a sum that felt pathetic but was my entire life's security. I found a room for rent in a shared house, a bleak, impersonal space that was a far cry from even my old apartment. But it was a start. For weeks, I was a ghost. I took 2, sometimes 3 jobs. I waitressed again, the muscle memory of carrying heavy trays and forcing a smile returning with a bitter irony. I stocked shelves overnight at a grocery store, the monotonous work a welcome, numbing agent for my mind. I was just a body going through the motions, my heart a stone in my chest. The pain was a constant companion, but I refused to let it break me. Instead, I let it fuel me. Clara's words, obsolete, became a mantra, not of defeat, but of defiance. One evening, after a double shift, I collapsed onto my narrow bed, my feet aching, my soul weary. My eyes fell on a forgotten box of my things that Sarah had retrieved from my old storage unit. Inside, amid photo albums and childhood mementos I couldn't bear to look at, was a sketchbook. I pulled it out, the leather cover soft and worn. I hadn't opened it in 20 years. As a girl, before the accident, I had dreamed of being a designer. I would spend hours drawing dresses, sketching intricate patterns inspired by the natural world. My teachers had called me talented, but after our parents died, practicality became paramount. The sketchbook was packed away, a childish fantasy sacrificed at the altar of responsibility. With trembling hands, I opened it. The pages were filled with youthful, hopeful designs, a dress inspired by the veins of a leaf, a jacket with embroidery like frost on a window pane. The talent was raw, but it was there. And for the first time since being thrown out, I felt a flicker of something other than pain, a spark of my old self. That night, I didn't sleep. I went to a 24-hour discount store and bought a new sketchbook and a set of pencils. I started drawing again. My hands, stiff from scrubbing dishes and hauling stock, slowly remembered their old skill. But my vision was different now. It was no longer the dreamy idealism of a girl. It was the refined, resilient eye of a woman who had known hardship. My designs became sharper, more structured, yet possessed of a delicate strength. They were armors and sanctuaries, all in one. I began sewing again on a second-hand machine I bought for a pittance. I used scrap fabric from textile warehouses, creating one-of-a-kind pieces. I started selling them at a local flea market. At first, it was just a trickle of income, but something remarkable happened. People were drawn to my work. They saw the artistry, the unique voice. A fashion blogger discovered my stall and wrote a feature. Orders started coming in. I quit my other jobs, pouring every waking hour into my new venture, which I named Phoenix Atelier. For 5 years, I worked. I lived and breathed my work. The pain of Clara's betrayal became the bedrock of my success. I never spoke of her, but every stitch, every perfectly tailored seam, was a silent rebuttal to her declaration that I was obsolete. My small business grew from a flea market stall to an online boutique, and then to a small but critically acclaimed studio in the city's arts district. Phoenix Atelier became known for its exquisite craftsmanship and its powerful, elegant aesthetic that celebrated resilience. I was not just successful, I had found myself. I had built a life that was entirely, authentically mine. One rainy afternoon, I was in my studio, finalizing a custom gown for a prominent client. The bell on the door chimed. My assistant was out, so I called, "I'll be right with you." I finished pinning a hem and walked out to the showroom. And then, I stopped dead. There, dripping onto the polished concrete floor, stood Clara. She was a ghost from another life. She looked diminished. The haughty confidence was gone, replaced by a nervous, hollowed-out anxiety. Her expensive coat was soaked, but it couldn't hide the fact that she had lost weight, and not in a healthy way. The light in her eyes, the one that had once been so bright and demanding, was extinguished. She looked like a woman who had been broken. Our eyes met. A lifetime of love, sacrifice, and betrayal hung in the air between us. Her lower lip trembled. "Ilara," she whispered, her voice cracking on the second syllable. I said nothing. I just stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs, a cyclone of emotions threatening to pull me under. Tears began to stream down her face, mingling with the rainwater. I didn't know where else to go. She took a hesitant step forward, her hands clutched tightly around her purse. "Julian left me," she choked out. "He cleaned out the accounts. He took Liam. He's using his money and lawyers, and I have nothing. I have nothing left." She looked around the beautiful, successful studio I had built with my own 2 hands, the life I had built without her. The contrast between her destitution and my prosperity was a stark, painful poem. Then she did the one thing I never thought I would see. Clara, my proud, cruel little sister, sank to her knees on my showroom floor. She wrapped her arms around herself, her body shaking with ragged sobs. "I was wrong, Alara," she cried, her voice muffled. "I was so horribly, terribly wrong. You were never obsolete, you were everything. And I threw you away. I destroyed the only real thing I ever had." She looked up at me, her face a mask of utter despair and regret. "I am so sorry. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve anything from you. But I am begging you, please, please help me. You're the only one who can." I looked down at the woman who had been my entire world, now broken and kneeling at my feet. The ghost of her slap seemed to whisper on my cheek. The echo of her words, "Get out of my house," faded into the sound of her weeping. The choice was mine. The power had shifted. And in that silent, heavy moment, I had to decide what kind of woman I had truly become.